Hello everyone and welcome back to another episode of Do I Have Time For This? The series that looks at old and new video games from indie to AAA and everything in between to help you figure out if you've got the time to play, finish, 100% complete a game, or to just leave it in your backlog to forever gather dust. Today we are looking at Warhammer 40,000 Space Marine 2. Even though this game is a mouthful to pronounce, this is a game I've been looking forward to playing and reviewing ever since it was announced at the Game Awards back in December of 2021. Being a casual fan of the Warhammer 40k franchise and a big fan of the original game, I was excited to see what developers Saber Interactive were capable of doing to the long-awaited sequel. Being the team behind a fairly boring but technically innovative game in the World War Z franchise, I figured if they brought the cutting-edge tech to a story and world that was actually interesting, they'd be sat on a goldmine, and boy was I right. Space Marine 2 is a sequel occurring long after the first game, where you play as disgraced Ultramarine Titus, forced to pay penance for an accusation of heresy after the events of the first game. I'll apologise in advance once again if I pronounce things wrong, as I'm not a die-hard scholar of the Warhammer 40k universe, but feel free to enlighten me in the comments. With an insanely deep amount of lore, horde tech, and hundreds of aliens on screen at once, let's grab our melter rifles and show this Tyranid scum who's boss. Space Marine 2 makes the odd decision to pick up sort of where the first game left off back in 2011. I say this is an odd decision, as given the number of years that have passed, you'd be hard pressed to find many of the casual audience who had given the first game a go. That being said, your tutorial mission sets you off as Titus tries to atone for his past sins, before getting promoted back into the Ultramarine Squadron. The first thing I'll mention here is the story. It's fairly bare bones, as with the majority of these games. There's a MacGuffin we have to go save or a person of interest to extract, and there's not much in the way of character development or drama to be had. I will say you kind of need to know the gist of what happened in the first game, as the story beats constantly reference Titus's previous outing and the choices he made. You can still definitely enjoy the game without this knowledge, but it just makes sense to do a quick Google search prior to starting the campaign. Again, with these games, there's also a near impenetrable wall of lore behind everything you see and do, alongside many of the conversations you have. A casual enjoyer such as myself will just be left nodding along as the Codex Astartes is mentioned, but you don't necessarily need to understand what it is to have a good time. You just have to kind of ignore the flying robot babies, as you'll never be told what they are. There are some short audio logs you can collect off the fairly linear path of the main story that'll provide a little extra context, but for the most part, if you don't know the world of Warhammer 40k, Space Marine 2 isn't going to hold your hand and tell you about it. I won't spoil where the story ends up, but I do find it funny that Titus keeps asking his commander for teams to help save the universe, and he just keeps saying the best he can do is only spare 3 people.
We're up against the forces of chaos. This threat is existential and all you can spare is 3 men.
We are below full strength as it is.
Just give us more men so we can strike at the heart of the chaos threat and end this. No.
Correct. You could be considered a heretic for not helping us. I'm just saying.
The main campaign honestly feels a little short, but this is because of the way the game is set up. Essentially, there are 3 game modes: the main campaign, co-op operations, and the PvP Endless War multiplayer. This means that there's something to fit each type of player, whether you want to play by yourself, with friends, or build up that gamer sweat. As I've already started with the campaign first, I'm going to run through the core gameplay and game feel here, then I'll talk about the other 2 game modes later on. As a side note moving forward, I played this game on the recommended difficulty, which is the 3rd highest, Veteran, so you may find your experience to be different if you play on normal. Space Marine 2 is a classic Xbox 360 era third-person shooter through and through, and I say that as a positive. This is by no means a cover shooter, and nor should it be, as Space Marines are supposed to be near indestructible powerhouses that rip and tear through enemies with ease. The core loop is basically walk into a room and kill everything, sometimes defending an objective or two. The simplicity is often where the fun comes from in this game, as the shooting and melee feel incredibly weighty and tactile, especially with the haptic feedback on the DualSense 5. The main enemy of the campaign are the Tyranids, a hive mind of incredibly agile and tooth-filled monsters who only exist to kill things, spread to other worlds, then rinse and repeat. The monsters themselves often operate in small groups, with elite enemies charging in alongside them, and this is where the combat innovations of the first game appear. Whilst the chaff enemies are easily cut down, the elite enemies play more like an action RPG enemy, requiring you to parry and dodge their attacks whilst hacking away with a melee weapon. If you successfully parry an enemy, you open them up to a quick-fire shot from your sidearm for massive damage, and after they take enough, they'll be open for a finisher. These finishers, much like in the newer Doom games, allow you to regain health and shield in order to keep fighting. Now, bear in mind whilst you're having one of these one-on-one battles, there can be about 20 to 30 monsters all trying to hack and bite at you, so you need to finish this fight quick if you don't want to get overwhelmed. This feeling of fighting amidst a horde of enemies, obliterating their leader and seeing the rest all be visibly affected by your victory, makes you feel unstoppable, and heals you in order to move and fight someone else.
Yes! I am invincible!
This is such a good gameplay feature to make you truly feel like a Space Marine. I feel like the combat here is truly at its best when you have a small group of Tyranids and 1 or 2 elite enemies to deal with, as when you get to the later stages in the game and you have 4 or 5 elites at once, it can get a little overwhelming in terms of where to attack next. The important thing to remember is just to never stop attacking. The variety of weapons you get to use in this game is extremely satisfying. You can find a good 5 or 6 different guns on the first level alone, but you can only have a pistol with a melee weapon and 1 primary weapon at any one time. However, there are weapon drops in practically every room, so you're encouraged to swap out often and not keep favourites. There are also a few heavy guns to go alongside these as one-off drops. On top of this huge suite of guns is the fact that you can customize your loadouts between missions on the battle barge, a sort of hub to switch between the different game modes where you get a few story cutscenes. This means that if you have a favourite weapon, you can change each of them alongside customizing your very own Space Marine for the operations and PvP modes. The AI you get with you in the campaign is also pretty decent. They know not to steal your elite executions so you can heal off them, and they'll come and resurrect you when you get downed. I only found one time where they got stuck on some geometry when trying to jump on an elevator, but that was once across the whole 10-hour campaign. The feel of Space Marine 2 is top notch. If industrial post-apocalypse Warzone was a vibe, this is definitely it. Unapologetic to non-fans, as I said before, this game will show you robot flying babies, floating skulls, half-man, half-robot abominations, people who have been grafted into machinery, the lot. You might feel a little lost as to why everyone is praying to some candles, but it never stops looking awesome. Graphically, it's a powerhouse, showing everything from swamps to jungles to factories with incredible density and detail. This is great to see, as with my review of the last Warhammer 40k game Bolt Gun, which you can find a link to on screen now, there was a big lack of area variety. This is even more impressive when you include the horde technology Saber has implemented here. In a lot of defensive situations, you'll find yourself up against literal hordes of aliens. The tech was originally used to make zombie hordes pile up and climb over walls, but here it is used to show the sheer scale of the Tyranid threat, be it in the background as you do your mission, or coming right at you as you try and stem the tide. Honestly, it's impressive how much is on screen at once, with the gore flying left and right, and not once did I have a single noticeable frame dip or stutter. Hats off to the devs for optimizing something that must be so mechanically complex. Next, let's talk the co-op PvE missions, the operations. In a clever twist on the traditional shooter story formula, the missions you complete in the operations with your friends are the supplementary support missions that get mentioned in the main campaign. Typically, some faceless Marines tend to do some sort of support objective. Well, here you are the faceless Marines. You also get a warning prior to playing the operations that you can get story spoilers from playing them, and will have to finish the main campaign in order to unlock them all. These co-op missions also have some standalone, non-story related missions too, but what surprised me the most was the addition of new enemy types, weapons, and skills in this mode. Here you have a selection of 6 different classes to choose from, each with their own individual skills, weapon loadouts, and armor sets. As you aren't allowed 2 of the same class type in a mission, you need to agree with your team on what sort of synergy you're going to go for, as you'll need to mix agile with tanky classes to make the most of your objectives. Alongside this, there's also a perk tree to upgrade per class, offering both individual and team bonuses to further promote teamwork and team builds. The mission structures themselves offer a lot less story and character building, but make up for it with raw gameplay. With the expectation that there's 3 skilled Space Marines in your squad, the game literally pours enemies at you. With an almost unfair level of elite enemies at times, you really need to work together and make the most of your class abilities to make sure you pull through from the frenetic mess of the Horde. When you get a good squad together, it builds massively on the power fantasy from the campaign, where literally nothing can stand in your way. There's also an incredible amount of customization. First off, each weapon you use has a mastery track, allowing you to unlock different weapon upgrades per the difficulty level you play, meaning you get stronger weapons the harder you go. At each level there is more than one weapon upgrade, but you can only choose one, meaning your weapon will feel like something unique to you rather than the same as everyone else's. Each weapon also has a perk tree, allowing for unique bonuses on the weapon as you upgrade it, from damage to mag size and more. Aside from these weapon cosmetics and upgrades, you also have the heraldry. The heraldry allows you to unlock different colorways for your Space Marine, so you can get emblems, colors, and armor pieces from an insane level of Marine chapters, including the Chaos ones. As you level up a class, you'll also unlock class-specific armor, encouraging you to stick with your favorites for new cosmetic pieces. I'd be here forever if I was to go through it all, but rest assured all your dreams of making your ideal Space Marine come true in this game. Now we've covered everything else, let's talk about something that used to be quintessential in the 360 era this game came from, the bolted-on multiplayer. The PvP offering here is fine, and not something I ever really came to this game for if I'm honest. The fact that at the time of writing there is only a handful of maps after a significant number of months after release is kind of shocking. I believe the main focus of the roadmap moving forward is for operations and a few new PvP modes to be added, so there's some hope yet. Whilst the customization of the classes is shared amongst the operations mode for what you've unlocked, the weapons naturally don't carry over so as not to make things unfair. The time to kill isn't particularly egregious or anything, and the classes and weapons feel more or less the same as in operations. To be honest, I never really felt like I had a bad time here, but it was never massively challenging either, but I think that's just down to me not being a PvP player anymore. Melee is often a case of whoever starts spamming the button first wins, unless you have the hammer, which is an instant win, but some of the skills are definitely better than others when it comes to the one that reveals enemy positions close to you, or the cloaking tech, but maybe that's just my personal opinion. I also think there's a distinct lack of footstep audio for enemies so heavy, but let's just move on. So let's get down to it. How long does this game take? On my playthrough, where I got a good half of the achievements, finished the main game and some operations alongside a stint of PvP, I ended up at a solid 20 hours. If you're a solo player just doing the campaign on a regular difficulty and not much else, you're looking at around 10 hours. However, if you wanted to finish every campaign mission, operations on all the difficulties, and play enough of the multiplayer to unlock all the achievements, it's 60 hours. The jump in time spent is due to the very grindy nature of some of the achievements, namely maxing out a class and one of each weapon type online, alongside killing 41,000 enemies. You'd think with the horde tech involved this wouldn't be too bad, but after getting all the other achievements, you're still looking at hours of shooting waves of enemies to get it. Aside from the huge grind and time sink of the achievements though, Space Marine 2 does respect your time, with a fairly generous autosave and checkpoint system for the main game, and the operations aren't overly long. The multiplayer itself consists of short matches, so it's easy to dip in and out of as well. I mainly played this game for an hour here and there, and found it didn't negatively impact on my experience at all. I only wish I had more time to play it. I'll still be playing this with my friend for the foreseeable future, and though some will look at 20 hours in bulk, I do believe these were an extremely fun 20 hours that I'm happily expanding in the co-op arena, rather than never touching it again. Overall, I'd say that Warhammer 40k Space Marine 2 is definitely worth your time. Not only is a throwback to the way games used to be developed, but is a great example of a hybrid game where live service elements can mix into a single player and co-op campaign without getting lost in pointless monetization and grind. The gameplay is slow and methodical, asking you to be the behemoth on the battlefield that others fear, wading into hordes of enemies that you almost never see in modern games these days, and it mixes up the original formula in all the right ways, not only to reflect the tabletop game itself, but bring a dated game to the current audience. If I had to nitpick, I'd rehash my old argument from my Warhammer 40k bolt gun video, the lack of enemy faction variety. Don't get me wrong, there were a significant number of Tyranid enemy types here, and having Chaos show up halfway through is great, but why must we always come back to Chaos every time we play as a Space Marine? I know, they are the big arch enemy, but when we have so many crazy factions to work with, why go for the equivalent of corrupted humans? We've seen this in so many games, where it starts out pitting you against some sort of monster enemy or zombie type, only to spend the majority of the playtime fighting against humans or humanoid enemies. It makes no sense in a world this rich in lore that we keep having to fight carbon copies of ourselves when we could literally be fighting anything else. It's also worth saying that if we look back at Boltgun, there was a huge amount of Chaos enemy types in comparison to essentially 3 here, that being Corrupted Marines, Chaos Space Marines, and the Goatmen. On top of this, the Tyranids in Chaos have their own type of crowd control enemies, that put down gas or mist you need to stay out of, that each have different effects. You could capitalize on this so much by adding another faction or two with similar results. Maybe you could try and take a control point in the galaxy, and everyone shows up to take it?
When a ninja shows up! And then a Nazi came! And then a evil pots and pans robot! Destroy! Destroy!
I think when it comes down to it, that the only real criticism is that you want more from a game can only be a good thing. Looking at the roadmap, they do want to add a new enemy in both Season 3 and Season 4, both in this year, so fingers crossed this is an enemy type and not just another Tyranid or Chaos variant. Do you have time for Space Marine 2? On this channel I like to give my thoughts on the game, alongside a bit more of a deep dive on the time you have to invest, so you know what you're getting into, because time is precious, right? If you enjoyed the video or found it useful, feel free to like and share. If you subscribe, I'm looking to put out regular content like this, alongside some more in-depth video essays and freeform videos, so stick around, and if you have any requests on future videos, just drop them in the comments. And finally, if you want to come chat with me, you can find me over on x.com/gracious_rhino. I'm Gracious Rhino, look after each other, and I'll catch you soon.